anniversary. Yes, it is. Thank you. Thank you, Zoom Siri. It is being recorded. Yes, we are here tonight to celebrate the 25th anniversary of The Craft, an empowering classic to many, many individuals, but specifically, at least speaking from my experiences, to the queer community, which is why it is taking a centerpiece at our Pride Festival. I'm going to hand over to our person of the hour from Ghouls Magazine, who of course will be, we will be working alongside. We are forever excited to work with Ghouls Magazine and everything that Zoe and the entire team has put together at that incredible horror collective. But just first, if I could ask everyone to keep their mics muted. There we go. If you could keep your mics muted, for the remainder of this interview, unless you are called to open up. We will have a chance for discussion, for questions and for debate kind of closer to the end. But if for the beginning, you can all keep your mics muted. There we go. I will hand over now to our absolute, and I can't say this with enough emphasis, our host with the most, Zoë Rose Smith. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you so much for having Ghouls Magazine back at Soho Horror Festival, and also me, as you know, very excited to be here. And of course, today we're going to be talking about The Craft. It's been, believe it or not, 25 years since it was released in 1996, which, yeah, it seems like quite a while ago. And I think after the pandemic, everything seems like a million years ago. But yeah, just want to start by saying a big thank you to Mitch for having us all here, and also for putting on throughout the pandemic, and also, you know, for Pride, an incredible series of events that I think we can all agree have kept us sane during one of the shittest times. So I'm not going to babble on too much, because I have three amazing panelists here with me today, and I'm just very excited to hear their thoughts on The Craft, because I know they're going to be far more eloquent than I am about the film. So I'm just going to go around, ask everyone to introduce themselves. You can say your pronouns, anywhere you write for. I'm sure everyone would love to hear. So I'm going to start. I'm going to call upon you, Stevie, to start.
Hello, hi, yes, I'm Stevie. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an actor and also a podcaster. I run and host a podcast called Brain Rot, just happen to be wearing this, which is an 80s horror podcast, this old thing. Yeah, and lifelong horror fan and craft fan.
Thank you so much, Stevie. And yes, your podcast, we'll maybe discuss a bit at the end, but you've had some ridiculous guests on that podcast. So yes, do make sure you go and listen to Brain Rot. Next up, I'm going to call on Alex. Over to you.
Hello, I'm Alex, they, them. I've been a horror fan for many, many years, but taken it much more seriously the last few, writing about films for about 4 years, most recently for Ghouls Magazine, and now Horror Obsessive as well, including some filmmaker interviews, which are very exciting. And thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Alex. Yes, you've done some awesome interviews for Ghouls Magazine lately, and all of the other places that you write for. So obviously we'll make sure to share all the links of everything. And last but not least, Kim, over to you.
Hi, I'm Kim, she, her. I write for Ghouls Magazine. I also write for my own blog, Little Red Horror, and I mainly write about feminist horror, or really daft, long lists about very specific horror incidences is the two sort of ends of the spectrum for me.
Thank you so much, Kim. You have literally written lists that I'm like, I don't know how you even come up with those lists. They're so wacky. I love them so much. So thank you for providing those to all of us. So let's get into our discussion. So I would like to know from all of you, when you first discovered The Craft, because obviously it has been a little bit of time since it's been released, what your initial thoughts were, and whether your thoughts have actually changed since seeing the film. So Kim, let's start with you. I know you're a big fan.
I think I must have seen it first about maybe 1998 or something. Me and my friend, we lived in this tiny village, and we went to the video shop. I wanted to rent I Know What You Did Last Summer. She was too chicken to rent it because it was like a full out horror. And my mum was like, well, why don't we rent this? Which I'd never actually heard of. She was like, well, with The Craft, it's got witches, and it looks a bit scary. And we're like, right, so we'll go for the middle point. So can only thank my mum for introducing me to it, because I might not have discovered it for a while afterwards. And I just became like completely obsessed with it. Like I used to watch it all the time. We spent a long periods of our breaks at high school like around the back of the buildings trying to do like light as a feather, stiff as a board, and try to call the corners and everything. And I was very witchy in high school, mainly, and still now, but mainly in high school due to this and like practical magic and stuff. So I was just I absolutely adored it. I think my thoughts now, I think I get a more like read on the like kind of feminist angles of it that maybe went over my head as like a 10-year-old or whatever. The whole bits about like toxic men and things I didn't really get, but I get a better reading of it now for that. So I think I enjoy it as much as I did then, but for different reasons. I just watched it this afternoon again just to make sure that I still loved it as much. And it's just brilliant. I always have such a good time with it. It's such a 90s horror time capsule of awesomeness.
Yeah, it's very it's so 90s. When I rewatched it, I was like, so many tracks in here that I'm like, I need to make like a craft playlist, which we're absolutely going to do that after this panel discussion. That's my Sunday task. What about yourself, Alex?
I watched The Craft at the cinema when it first came out. I wasn't youngster like you lot. Back then, I watched films just for escapism and fun and didn't take them too seriously, but I considered it to be kind of the horror equivalent of Heathers, in that it was looking at girls who were not part of the popular set, and that was an attraction. I wasn't one of them either, but only later on, looking back, when I was more outside of that world, was able to see different interesting elements to carry forward, as thankfully the film has carried forward. Only now, looking back, can I really see how dark it was compared to many teen horror films that were just juicy fun back then. It is interesting to look at it as a snapshot in time, but it does endure. It's interesting stuff.
I think you're you're absolutely right when you say it's quite dark in a lot of places, and we'll definitely come on to a few of those elements of it, but yeah, there were a certain couple of points in there where I was like, oh, that's quite it's quite heavy, which I think, you know, perhaps watching it younger, maybe it doesn't come through as much. And what about you, Stevie?
I remember so very clearly the first time I walked past the poster on the Underground on my way to school back in 96, I think, and I was about 11, and it stopped me in my tracks. I was already a devoted horror fan, so there was the macabre element of the poster, of course, which attracted me, but it was more than that. I didn't know anything about the film, but I knew it was for me, if that makes any sense. And I had to wait to rent it on VHS. Once I did, it was everything I'd hoped for and more. To this day, it is the film that I have seen more than any other film in the world. The bulk of that being from when I was age 12 into my early teens. And the film spoke to me so deeply. And yet at the time, I didn't know what it was that was resonating with me. I just knew that there was this undeniable bond between me and the characters. So for a long period, actually, I decided it must be that I'm a witch. And so my room was covered in Wiccan books and trinkets and potion bottles for many, many years. And it was only as I got older and rewatched the film that I truly discovered why it was calling to me. And rewatched it yesterday, and my thoughts haven't changed. I I still think it's a masterful depiction of the inner struggles teens are faced with.
Oh, it really does look at those struggles. And, you know, like you said, I mean, when I was younger, I mean, for a while I thought that I was going to get a Pokemon, and that was a different scenario. But then the next one, I was like, I must be a witch. I'm definitely going to find out either I'm a witch or a slayer. I think witches maybe, you know, a little bit more attainable. We can all do that. We'll set up our coven tomorrow along with the playlist. It's fine. So I think the biggest thing about the craft, and I think you all kind of picked up on it there, is that it's about embracing, I guess, being different, embracing who you are, and especially as a teenager, it's such a tough time to really kind of understand who you are. And I think, you know, even later in life, we're all still kind of, you know, discovering ourselves. And I also think the craft really looks at like harnessing our inner power, which is something, you know, very, very important. So I would love to know kind of how did you personally connect with the film, and what particular themes did you perhaps resonate with? We'll go back to you, Stevie.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, when I look back, the reason I resonated with it so much is because I knew there was something different about me. And here they were, the quote unquote weirdos, front and center, and they're badass, they don't apologize, and they are stoic in their perceived differences. And it was so galvanizing to see that. And as a young gay teen with a taste for the morbid, I thought I was fucked. I really did. I thought I'd never embraced the weirdo inside me fully. But the craft was honestly instrumental in establishing my pride and inner confidence. And the "we are the weirdos" Mr. line has become a mantra, not only for me, but for all of us who feel like the other, I guess.
Yeah, it's I think being a weirdo, I mean, same as you at school, it was, you know, I went into school, I was like, yeah, so I really like dead stuff. Not like actual dead stuff, but in movies, and people are like, that's weird. And I was like, oh God, I am a weirdo. But like you said, kind of it becomes a mantra. And I think we all carry that now. What about you, Kim?
Yeah, I think it was quite similar. And like I said, I grew up in a really small village. So there, everyone, there wasn't a lot of like weirdos there. And then when I went to high school as well, it was quite similar. I think films like The Craft sort of enabled me to like just lean into it and like embrace it. My mum always used to say when I got bullied, she was like, if it was me, I would just like change the way I dressed to like suit other people. She's like, but I know that that's not what you're like. And I was like, well, yeah. So I think films like The Craft really helped me see that it's fine to be different and look different, and they sort of embrace that, like you said, with their inner power. And I think that's a really important thing to teach you. And the fact that they like, I mean, obviously they take it too far, but the fact that they embrace their power and they become more comfortable in themselves, and they sort of like start just like dressing like nicer and all together, and it's none of this like makeover stuff that usual teen movies have, or like changing how you look to suit a boy or anything. Everything they do is very much like for themselves, and I think that's still such a like empowering thing. That montage to Letters to Cleo, where they're like walking through the school and having sleepovers and stuff, I would still love to have like a group of friends like that. It still relates to me in the same way of just, yeah, embracing the weirdness and not bothering what other people think.
Yeah, I think for me, when I watched The Craft, I was like, yeah, I like that. I was like, they don't care, which I think, you know, compared to a lot of other horror films, we see that there's a lot of kind of worry about, you know, what other people think. And yeah, in The Craft, it's like, no, that's absolutely fine. Alex?
You got a lovely loaded question there, Zoe, as you tend to. I did not personally connect with it for a long, long time, until maybe looking back. I was a weirdo at school, but not the visibly different goth or punk type like some of them may dress as in the film, but rather the quiet bookworm, didn't know how to fit in. I can look back and see that as autism. But because of that, I was stubbornly weird, because I never would have known how to try and fit in. And so I envy what those girls in the film have, that they understood their own traits. I didn't understand mine. So I have a bit of a conflict with the characters in the film, which is gives me an interesting perspective, but it doesn't mean that I can connect in the same way.
I think that gives you a really interesting perspective, though. And, perhaps, maybe some of us connected at the time when we first saw it, but I think actually you kind of reflecting on it is really interesting, and obviously enriches our conversation today, hence why I'm very excited to have you here, Alex. And I'm going to pick on Mitch because he doesn't get involved, he just sits in the background. Mitch, what about you? I know you like this film and connected with it.
So I'm going to say one thing and one thing only, and I think everyone will pick up what I mean by that. And I'm just going to say slow-mo high school corridor walk. I'm seeing a lot of smiling and nodding. Absolutely. So, I mean, this film is just such an...
Hell yeah.
Oh, yes.
I agree. I agree.
I'm glad.
It's awesome. And it also kind of resonates with me with like the weirdo kind of stuff. And I kind of I found out about it purely because of Mum. I blame her for most of my film and TV show interests. Well, her and Dad, they both like films, but mostly Mum, and specifically the horror aspects, because Dad's not as into horror as Mum is. So yeah. But I agree with you, Mitch.
I mean,
like 100%.
That is transgenerational horror and empowerment exactly there. Thank you for your input there. Thank you, Nathan. So yeah, what I was kind of saying there, I mean, that's the slow-mo walk, be it in 10 Things I Hate About You or Cruel Intentions, or for our case here, The Craft. It was this case of being the weirdo. I mean, I was the weirdo, mister. That's how I always felt. And I think The Craft was a perfect distillation. It's probably the best example of that distillation for me, wherein that otherness and that outsider was empowered to a place of power, where they rose above. I mean, the film really doesn't kind of waste its time looking at kind of the social stratus or the hierarchy of high school. It whips by it very quickly because it's so much more interested in those outsiders and those weirdos, those queerdos, and that's where I found myself. And I think that's why the film kind of linchpinned itself to me so much. It was a full-on meat hook moment. I mean, just to circle back kind of to your first question, Zoe, my experience of The Craft was I grew up in a fairly small town. And we didn't have a Blockbuster at all. We had one fairly small video rental store. And whenever I would go on a Saturday, they had you could rent 3 VHSs for, I think it was like it might have been £10 or something. And I would always rent both copies of The Craft. And my mum would say, but why? You could get another film. And I would say, because I don't want anyone else to see it. I want that film myself. I mean, that's quite narcissistic in reflection, but it was kind of just testament to how much that film meant to me and how much kind of I attached myself to it. I wanted to constantly watch it, and kind of, yeah, that's what The Craft was to me. It was a genuinely defining film, I think, in both my personal kind of psyche, my journey in horror, and what I would later realize would be my kind of my sexual and gender identity.
And I think that, obviously, I guess you know, looking at it when we kind of said, right, let's do the craft for Pride. I think it was such an interesting kind of way to look at it. And, you know, I guess within the film, there's definitely queer elements, but I think that it doesn't necessarily, you know, it's not a super kind of queer film in the fact that it shows, but I think there's a lot of tropes in there, and one of the ones that I kind of picked up on was witches. And I think we have it, you know, we saw earlier today, Mitch, with some of the films you program, vampirism. It's very fluid, something that I've always, you know, personally been very drawn to, is kind of it doesn't really matter about gender or identity. And I think in the craft, witches are, you know, they kind of, for me anyway, resemble that. And witches, you know, they were chastised for their sexuality. And during the trials, it was often sexuality that got them murdered, that got them killed. You know, many of them were queer, and for them that was the sole reason that they found themselves being horrifically and brutally murdered. So I don't know about you guys, but do you feel that witches, and even I guess outside of witches, you know, if you want to talk about further outside of witches, do you feel like they in a way represent the LGBTQIA plus community in any way? I'm gonna throw that over to you, Stevie. I see you nodding.
Damn it. No, yeah, of course there's undeniable parallels there. And because although the craft doesn't explicitly focus on any queer topics or tones, I mean, you can read it as one sort of big coming out story, releasing the power within, which can be correlated to sexuality, gender, or just about anything. But also the chastising of outsiders in the craft in terms of race and all that, and class, gender, ability. It 100% presents and includes a comment on all that suffer marginalization. So I know for me, it's very malleable in that way, how you want it to be seen. For me, it was all about my sexuality and relate to the fear of being burned at the stake for my gay witchery.
Well, we hope you don't get banned at the stake. But absolutely, you know, I think the craft definitely kind of, you know, talks around that. What about you, Kim?
I think it's a sort of thing that people just tend to like fear the thing that they don't know really. I think the fact that they sent it like a Catholic school and then had these girls sort of practicing this other religion's probably not a mistake. It's the whole thing of like, this is clearly the way like society and their parents expected them to be, was putting them into this Catholic school, and then but they've chosen their own path and they've come together and found this community and been happier with it like that. So I think that's, yeah, I feel like that's the way that they've sort of connected it up there.
Yeah, and actually, you know, you bring up the Catholic school. For me, on a rewatch, there was a really very, at the beginning of it, there's a long kind of panning shot on Jesus, and I was like, that's quite, it's subtle in a way, but, and I never really noticed it before, and I was like, that actually in its subtleness makes quite a big statement for, you know, much of the film, the queer elements of the film, you know, how you can read it. What about you, Mitch? What would you think?
I mean, kind of echoing what both Kim and Stevie said, like the witches or a lot of kind of supernatural archetypes are often a muse for queerness. I mean, there is so much kind of not necessarily revisionist, but discovering of queer coding in so many supernatural texts. I mean, it's not out of realm to say that it's general historical fact that kind of more effeminate males were called out as being warlocks. Despite, obviously, like, we're not going to plow into kind of the social and historical discourse of things that got you prescribed as being a witch, but that was one of them. And I think that like we've mentioned, kind of that sense of otherness has always been a kind of archetypal of the witch. I think if we're talking specifically from a queer perspective, it's not unusual that there is so many people within the LGBTQIA plus community that associate with films like The Craft, like Hocus Pocus. These aren't films that have queer content in them explicitly, and yet we hail them as iconic and archetypal, and we buy the t-shirts that even organizations like the Disney company, which aren't exactly pro-queer celebrating, but we eat it up because we associate so much for a specific reason with these archetypes, because they are, like I say again, these people that have been cast out by a social majority, and yet within that ostracization, they find their own true center and they find their power through that. And I think repeatedly in The Craft, you see that. And one of the biggest things I think that is resonant with this film, historically, and I'd really love it. It's such a shame we maybe don't have someone from Gen Z here that could watch this film without those nostalgia glasses on. But I really like to think anyway that they would see this film, despite maybe some of its more problematic elements that we might get onto in a bit, as something that uplifts these individuals that have otherwise been kind of cast down in a way.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think otherness in the horror community and, you know, in the LGBTQI plus community is, you know, it's that kind of element of it that really draws us to many of these films. You know, I recently spoke to some people about Raw, and it was the otherness that everyone connected with. And it's like, we're not necessarily cannibals, but we understand feeling outside of it. And what about you, Alex?
I'd be reluctant to say that witches represent queer communities, but there are certainly parallels. I think many minority groups have been misunderstood or feared over the centuries, and that's the kind of thing we're talking about. That's where the parallel comes in, whether it was women going through a difficult menopause that they were considered to be looking like witches, or people who had unusual religion to their community, people who are misunderstood in some way go through something similar to what queer people have over the years. Fortunately, less so these days, but there are parallels. Non-traditional lifestyles, you might say, can be lumped together. These days, I would hope that society's grown up some more. We don't need metaphors on the screen. We could put real queer people in front of us rather than those who can be similar. Let's have them really there as they are in our faces. By the way, in terms of films that show people kicking back with their sexuality, Neve Campbell did one better than this, which was Wild Things. That one I'm a real fan of as well. So although, as you say, sexuality wasn't a major feature in this one, it has featured in other films that these people have participated in.
And I think that's quite, that's a really interesting point, actually, Alex, is that, you know, even though maybe this film in particular doesn't have that element, the fact that they've gone on to do other things obviously shows that for these actors and, you know, that for them, it's kind of about, you know, starring in films where they've got these storylines that actually do raise those points. So then, you know, Mitch, you start talking a bit there about, you know, problems with the film and, you know, various things like that. And one of the things that not necessarily a problem, but let's see what you guys think, is the film kind of portrays men as a big problem. I'm sure many of us to an extent would agree with that, but I would like to kind of get your thoughts on, do you agree with it? What do you think about that? Do you think there's any problems with the way that they portray men in the film? Alex, let's start with you.
Okay, I'll start by disagreeing. I don't think men are the problem in the film at all. I think the problem, as portrayed in The Craft, is the gender divide and the way that everybody responds in their own way to that, either trying to make the boys attracted to them, or trying to do something that reacts against that. But if that gender divide wasn't there, the men themselves wouldn't be an issue. Both genders played with each other's weaknesses and each other's tastes in that film and got caught out. There were lots of lessons learned, playing with fire going on, but neither gender in its own right was the issue.
Great response there. And yeah, I mean, there's some problematic women in that film as well. So what about you, Kim?
Yeah, I think it's there is obviously problematic men, but I think because you're kind of sided with the four girls, you maybe view the men more as a problem, even though you're sort of reckoning it. I think it's because you go on the journey with the four women, really. You kind of see them like learn from their mistakes, kind of eventually. But I think with the men, we just sort of dip in and out of their story, so we get them more just focus on the problematic elements. But I quite like it because I think it's sort of, I mean, they do it with the female characters as well. They focus on like bullying in high school and things, but then they focus on the things like boys lying about you sleeping with them, and boys that you do like taking things too far. And I mean, like Sarah's dad's a nice guy the whole way through the film. They clearly don't hate all men, but I think it's a good representation of the sort of different problems that teenagers can come up against. I think the men just maybe get a harder time of it because they're very much on the side and the women are the main focus.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I guess we don't really get to see much from the males' perspectives, and I guess, you know, on a personal level, as being a teenage girl and constantly, you know, trying to get the attention of shitty boys at school, I look back and I go, oh yeah, I kind of get that, but I'm sure, you know, a lot of them have actually grown up to be very nice people. So I think it's yeah, high school's not the nicest place when we're there. Stevie, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with everything Alex and Kim have said, and definitely the gender divide, that's more of the focus there. And you know, there are some things in there, and I don't think it's anti-men in any way, but it's deliberately highlighting an existing and continuous issue in terms of men, the certain things they put in. But also, yeah, these girls are flawed, and it's hard because obviously, yeah, you're rooting for them, but they're flawed. The depiction of power hunger and vanity and revenge, you know, that's all there. And yeah, the men in the film are dicks, but we need to see that also so that the girls can be pushed to certain limits in order to ignite the drive in certain places. And but then also you've got a character of the racist schoolgirl Laura, so it actually does balance it out somewhat, I think.
Yeah, it is quite balanced in many different ways. And what about you, Mitch?
I think some of the points that have been raised are so incredible. I mean, Alex kind of retrospectively looking at this film through a post-binary lens is wonderful, and I think does certainly put up a black mirror against a lot of the kind of the retrospective backlash that I mean, Zoe, your question is touching on. A lot of these, I mean, we've all seen them. We've all been bored to fucking tears by them in the last year. These articles that get put up over 90s or early noughties films where they go, hey, guess what? That film that you love, it's really shitty. And I think that there is a merit to kind of viewing those films through a modern lens, obviously, but I think we always have to take, whenever we're looking at something retrospectively, kind of the credence and the kind of the boiler pot with which it was birthed. And specifically with The Craft, not only is it a film, like Stevie said, that is dealing with imperfect teenage girls, it's also from a writer and a director that was a young out. Actually, no, I shouldn't say that. I'm not sure if Andrew was out at the time, but Andrew Fleming, the director, now an out gay male. Not sure if he actually was within Hollywood at the time because of all the issues that surround that in and of itself. And it is, I think, imperfect. in its portrayal of certain individuals, whether you think that it is hating of males as kind of an entire binary or not. But what it is it's reflective of an individual at that time, or a group of individuals at the time. I mean, we've all been teenagers, we've all been love lust at some point in our lives, and we've done things that we would, if we were doing a 25th anniversary retrospective on ourselves, go, oh, that's a little bit problematic, actually. I'll hold my hand up, at least in that one. And I think a lot of the things that the craft explores are protagonists doing things that aren't inherently likable. It widens the question, I think, whether kind of the girls in the four corners, how would you see maybe a few of them, whether you'd see them as protagonists explicitly, problematic protagonists, or anti-heroes. I think there's a spectrum there, and I think that in itself is really, really interesting, both to look at, to examine, and also, as far as I'm concerned, to put yourself into. I mean, again, I'll hold my hands up and say I relate to and associate so much, to the point that I would wear her on a t-shirt with Nancy Downs. I mean, some of the things that she does in this film, yes, are questionable at best, and reprehensible at I think 2021 standards. But why do people wear, why are myself and Kim wearing t-shirts from this film of people that are doing things that are genuinely quite despicable if you look at them in a black and white term? And it is, I think, because we've been there. We might not be there now, but we have been there at some point. We've all been at a point in our life, sorry, not we've all been, I've been at a point in my life where men have been assholes. It's not an ACAB situation. It's not that all men are bastards, but some can be. And I think what this film does is not only shows that, but also shows the flip side of that, that sometimes there is a form of teenage lust that can be complicit into it. Sometimes the things that we think as teenagers are the worst things in the world and that are our enemies are actually not when we look back on them. And maybe that we are complicit in making those people enemies.
You're describing why we like anti-heroes, Mitch. We can relate to them because we see both sides sometimes. But excuse me interrupting you. I think I've also recalled that we've seen Robin Tunney leading the men in The Mentalist. I wonder if her character back in the craft would have even imagined that happening. Gender roles and the gender divide has changed over that time.
It has changed, and I think that's I think you all raise amazing points, and I think kind of talking about the fact that things have changed in 25 years. They absolutely have, and I think, of course, they've changed for the better. We still have more change to do on so many aspects of life. But I think that is maybe one of the reasons why it's quite interesting to look back on a film like this, and also, pick up on the fact that it was produced in a time, made in a time where, we didn't have the same conversations, we didn't have the same openness. And I think, Mitch picked up on a really good point there, talking about kind of being flawed. I think one of the reasons that many of us still resonate with the film and the characters to an extent is the fact that the film is, yes, it's flawed in its own right, characters are flawed, but us as humans, unfortunately, we've all done very problematic things, and it's okay, that's all right, we're all learning, and I think that's why the craft it's quite powerful when you look at it 25 years later and how the landscape has changed. And so talking about kind of how things have changed, obviously they brought out Craft Legacy, which was kind of the reworking of it. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it. I know that Alex has seen it, for instance, but those of you who have seen it, obviously, if you haven't, feel free to skip the question. What are your thoughts on the fact that, you know, diversity and inclusivity in the new film has taken? And do you think it's a positive for younger generations to have, I guess, kind of their version of the craft, which is perhaps, you know, more inclusive and diverse? I'm going to throw that over to you to start with, Kim.
I mean, yeah, I think so. I've only seen it once when it first came out, so I maybe don't have the best memory of everything that happened in it. But I think, like, for me, the craft was so important to me growing up, and it really like shaped a lot of the stuff I got in, and still the way I dress and everything. So I think to give people a version that they can like grow up with is super important. And I think it being more inclusive and having trans people and gay people and things in it is much better than the, I mean, you look back at the original craft and it is very just like a lot of white people and everything. And it's nice to see more inclusiveness. I love any horror film that has a period blood scene in it, so it gets a big thumbs up from me for that. But yeah, I think it's good to try and make something that encompasses the weirdness that people might be feeling and the like uncertainty in their lives, but sort of update it to try and include more things that people might be feeling or going through just now, so that they can know that like everything that you feel or decide that you are or whatever is fine, and you will they still have, they make friends and they form this little coven again. I think I think it's I mean, I know it got, films like that are always going to get a lot of shtick. The new Black Christmas kind of got the same, but I think it's important to remake films like that or reboot them or whatever the legacy actually was. To update them for an audience and give them something that they can experience, rather than looking back at something that was important to like a couple of generations ago.
Yeah, because I guess it could be quite difficult looking at a film, you know, when you've been Gen Z. You know, I talk to my brother, he's I have no idea what he's talking about. There's such a different you know, kind of world and landscape to what we're in. So I think it's quite interesting that they've gone down that route. Alex, I know that you've seen the film, and actually it was our discussion prior to this that maybe kind of include a couple of questions in here. So what are your thoughts on this? Because I know you've got a few.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely a positive for a start. It's not a brilliant film, but it's brilliant that it does exist. And I like to think that it's time to have all kinds of people represented in quality films, in mundane films, in cheap films, in artsy films, in every kind of films. In terms of looking at non-horror, you mostly see queer characters in the art house stuff or niche stuff. In horror, it's gradually getting here and there, all over the place. So in that sense, I'm very happy that it was included. And the queer elements were included in two respects. There was a trans actor playing a trans character, and her character was very much included amongst the friends as one of the girls, included in exactly the way that she wanted to be, which is bang on. Was barely picked on at all by anyone outside of that group. Still, you could see that it wasn't an easy transition to have gone through, but it was a natural one. The other element was a bisexual man. I can't remember if the bisexuality was part of what he was bewitched into, but what definitely did come out was his experience of a phobia amongst his peers, and that was very rare to see on any screen, horror or not. It was not simply a bisexual person in there as a token. It was part of the story and given some character. So yeah, definitely positive. The next thing I want to see though is that these things feature with a bit more realism. It's easy to dismiss as just a fantasy story, not something people really go through, but we do. We go through all of these things.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alex. That was yeah, it's I think it's fantastic that we're seeing. I think that a film like The Craft from 25 years ago could help to actually allow for another version to be made that's far more inclusive and does bring, you know, the stories of marginalized voices to the forefront and actually talk about them and just go, you know, it's perhaps, like you said, it's not the most realistic, and I think that's okay in the format that it comes from. You know, I guess as sad as it is for all of us, witches aren't as realistic as we all wish they were, but I think it's so great that, you know, a film like The Craft has really kind of paved way for a film like Craft Legacy to come around and be inclusive. And Stevie, I'm not sure if you've seen this one. I threw it your way, but
No,
you know.
I still, not because I'm super precious about the original, but I just haven't got around to it yet. But I'm especially looking forward to seeing it now, hearing what everyone's saying.
Yeah, I think it's I actually haven't seen it either. I told Alex I'd watch it this week, and you know, time got away from me. And Mitch, have you managed to watch this one?
Oh, I saw it as soon as I could get my thirsty little paws on it. Yeah, as as a successor to a film that means so much to me, just seeing I think I'd like to preface by saying just seeing the craft evolve into a next generation in and of itself is wonderful. I think we have so many films, be it from the 70s, 80s, 90s, early noughties, that we associate so much with, that have gotten, maybe even gotten love in this kind of in the last few years, but haven't been looked back upon. The fact that we do have the craft legacy, I think, is amazing. Now, I think I love this film more for what it stands for than I do the film itself. So removing myself from this, because the craft is such a personal film for me, I think what the craft legacy is it's inspiring a whole new generation of goth girls and gay boys, or thems, or whoever you want to identify. It's absolutely not mine, and I love that. I love that they are able to take a property that is what many people hold so dear, and move that to something else. I mean, the fact, like Alex mentioned, that they casted Zoe Luna. One of my absolute biggest advocacies is that we are putting trans actors in roles, and not making the character storyline be that they are trans, because that's not the sole identifier of these people. That's a massive thing. And also, yeah, like previously has been said, bisexual representation. Biphobia is one of the last bastions that have kind of not been hacked down. It's still been used either as a joke or a caveat for queer representation. So actually having it explored in a genuinely sensitive way, within the craft legacy, there's a very quiet scene between two characters where they discuss bisexuality, between teenagers as well. I think that is almost in itself, in its own quiet, intimate way, as iconic as a slow motion high school corridor walk scene. The craft legacy is the craft evolved. It might not be what I wanted from a craft sequel, but I do think it represents maybe what is needed from a craft sequel.
No, and I think, you know, like you said there, I mean, for me, you know, seeing actors that, you know, a trans actor playing a trans character, it's the same. You know, disabled characters playing disabled characters. Like the amount of times we've seen, you know, people that are not that playing an actor of, you know, one of those things. It's, I think, being able to see that immediately kind of makes Craft Legacy, you know, one of those films that is paving the way for how we hopefully will see more and more films become. And hopefully, you know, we might get more sequels to some of our beloved 90s films that, you know, perhaps look at it through a lens that's a little bit more relevant to today. So we haven't got too much long left. I've got a few more questions, but I'm going to try and just go to the ones that I like anyway. No, the ones that I think will, elicit a good response. So I'm really keen because obviously in the craft, we've got 4 really strong central characters in there, and they're all very, very different, which I personally really love. So I'm keen to know if there's any of those characters that you identify with, or any themes of their personality traits that you kind of connected with, and also why. So I'm going to throw it straight over to Stevie to start with.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and this isn't a cop-out, it's a bit of each of them, to be honest, because, I've got elements of Bonnie's lack of confidence, Nancy's rage due to oppression, Sarah's apprehension, and Rochelle's victimization. So it's kind of a soup of all of them. And that's what I think is wonderful about the film. It's very malleable in what you can take from it. And it's not easy to do that because it doesn't feel completely set, which is what I love of it. So it really is, I couldn't pick one. And no, I definitely couldn't pick one. It's like I've exploded all over the screen.
In my head, I've got this bizarre vision of you, Stevie, completely exploded everywhere. But I think you're right. I think that's, again, one of the great things about the craft is that actually they've all kind of, I think we can read it in a sense that they're all kind of representative of different elements of, us that maybe felt as outsiders. There's that rage when I had to go to anger management at school. And if anyone knows me from the last couple of years, I probably should have continued going there. But, also resonate with many of the other aspects of the other characters. Like you said, it's not just quite the rage. What about you, Kim?
I think I've done a few BuzzFeed quiz for this, and I always get Sarah. And I can see everyone in the chat saying they think she's the most boring. But I think maybe a mix between like Bonnie and Sarah, because there's that line where Nancy's talking about how Chris looks at anything with tits, and Bonnie's like, "Oh, except for me," and that was me in high school. I was the one that just kind of hid the lawyer in the coat and no one really looked at. But I think a bit of Sarah as well, because she just, I don't know, she's got all this stuff going on, and she just tries to deal with it all herself. You kind of just, I feel like, always internalizes stuff a bit. She's always trying to like speak to people. She tries to speak to Nancy, and Nancy's more interested in kissing a snake, and she tries to talk to Chris, but he's so like loved up, he's not listening to her. And I feel like, yeah, a bit of that, of just definitely when I was younger anyway, like struggling to find the people to talk to about the stuff that was messing with your head at school. So yeah, probably a combo of those two.
I mean, Sarah's the main character, so basically, it's not a bad person to be, is what I always say. What about you, Mitch?
Sorry, mute issues there. Not to be, right, a democratic fence sitter like Stevie, but it genuinely is kind of a melting pot between the 4 of them. And I think that's what's really interesting about the film. Sarah has the personal connection for me of being that person that's discovering something and discovering a power they didn't know they had. And she does, as far as we're aware in the film, keep it from her parents. It is something that is quite personal to her. That journey isn't something that she is necessarily kind of ostentatious with. But principally, there are kind of 2 things in the film that I think are really resonant, at least nowadays. One of them is when that iconic We're the Weirdos Mr. scene, where they take a bus to a field somewhere, just, light a lot of candles, way more paraphernalia than you could genuinely capacitate in the bags they're carrying, but that's neither here nor there. When they do call the corners and they're ascribing kind of what they want, and Sarah does say Chris Hooker because that's who she fancies. I mean, I've fucking been there for one. So Sarah in that moment, because even if we know that we shouldn't be going for that guy, that person, we do. But also there's a really, really beautiful moment that I'm so glad they included in the edit, which is of Nancy just looking a little bit forlorn that Sarah's fallen for this person. And I think it's one of the most human elements of Nancy in the whole film. I recommend everyone rewatch that scene or the film kind of as a whole and pay particular attention to Nancy's reactions to what Sarah wants when she is calling the corners. And also Rachel True giving an incredible performance and completely bucking the trend of revenge fantasy. This film is so much about revenge fantasy, and for many people, and not to discredit them, this film is about kind of getting back at the bullies. But I think Rochelle's storyline shows very much that it's not as cathartic as you think it will be, and there are far better journeys to self-discovery and empowerment than revenge. So yeah, all of them.
You actually picked up on two really good points there. I mean, when I rewatched it, I actually, thinking of Nancy, I think throughout the film, she's, I think it's so easy to look at her through the lens of being potentially kind of the bad guy, at the end, she kind of loses her shit. But actually, I think, there seems to be a lot of jealousy and envy, and perhaps, Nancy might even be, as I read it anyway, a potentially queer character that, she has clearly a very big connection with Sarah, like you said, Mitch, and throughout it, it's probably why she then becomes so angry towards Sarah. And they have this, one of my friends before she came out, she said to me she would become very, very angry because, the person that she liked in her life, she couldn't tell them that because she hadn't come out yet. So it became, almost kind of like this ball of rage that she lived with. And I think, that comes through in Nancy as well. And also, just picking up on the revenge element, a lot of critics said that the horror community only like it because they just like revenge and that. And I'm like, well, look, I like rape revenge films. So to an extent, yes. But I actually think, we all find a lot of catharsis in going, well, revenge is not as nice as it seems in real life. Like we probably wouldn't do the nasty things to those bullies because we're all nice people somehow, regardless of our viewing habits. Alex, what about you? I'm interested to hear your thoughts because I know you said at the beginning that you didn't connect that much with any of the characters.
You're right. In relating to an individual on screen is not something that comes naturally to me. Though I did recognize some of what Sarah was going through towards the end of the film when the stuff with her jock got too much, let's say. There was an experience not long before this came out that I could see when I rewatched it on the screen recently. As for the revenge thing, what draws weirdos perhaps to this film about the revenge is not that we love seeing it, but here it's really being questioned. We don't automatically fight back. We try to work out various ways to handle it differently sometimes. Yeah, it's great to see the catharsis of the oppressor being punished, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can perhaps rein in some of our friends given half the chance, and that is explored in the craft just nicely, that there are different perspectives on how to treat the bullies.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more with you on that one, Alex. So we're gonna start wrapping up now. So I've got one kind of final question for you all. I just really want to hear, like we've talked about so many different elements of the craft, and it's as with all of these discussions, I'm sure we could pick out, super minor points, but that's for the podcasts and stuff and the articles that you all write and record, so I'll leave it to that. But I'm really keen to kind of just get your, you know, your closing thoughts on I guess why you love this film so much, and also, you know, for anyone that's never seen The Craft, and I'm hoping that everyone in the comments here has seen it, otherwise we might have spoiled it a little bit, why you would recommend this film to people. Alex, let's start with you.
Is that because I've not gone back onto mute yet?
I thought it'd be the, you know, if you're off mute, you may as well just start there, right? No faffing
Okay.
around.
Some final thoughts. We have 4 young women embracing non-conformity. That's great. That's great. It's great to see how much confidence they can gain from that. But what's best about The Craft is we see how it doesn't necessarily last. There's no neat good and bad there. It's not one of those Hollywood endings, as they say. It does really question that there are paths that can be taken. We can choose the path to take. We can choose how we respond to our circumstances. And that's great for us all to listen to. These 4 people of different backgrounds have got initially a common perspective on those differences, a common outlook. Personally, I think the Ghouls are good for that. So thanks for including me there as well.
Well, I'm glad we can do that, but I think that's yeah, I think that's why The Craft is so good. Inclusivity and harnessing that inner power is always going to be something that, you know, even personally, you know, I will continue to champion, as I know Mitch does as well, with Soho, and hopefully, you know, the rest of the horror community will just keep on doing that, and anyone else that's not getting involved with that we'll shun them. We'll just block them all, or whatever we do nowadays. Mitch, what about you?
Curse all racists with boldness. No, I spoke about kind of Rochelle's journey as revenge not being the most forthwardly way forward. To me, The Craft represents a capsule of time, a capsule of being for myself, and I do believe for many others, that yes, in retrospect, maybe grounds to grow upon, but still it means a lot for many people that have been there previously, and it might still exist there for many people now, which is that empowering of otherness. It is that sense of, not to be clickbaity, BuzzFeedy, but it is being and owning being a weirdo mister. It's getting on or off public transport and telling that municipal worker that you're a weirdo, you're okay. You don't need the majority perspective to protect you or to alter you. I think that's the biggest thing. It's why I've kind of coined this phrase, "We're the queerdos, mister." Why I have focused on that, "We are the weirdos, mister." It's because it's specifically a minority group saying, we're okay. We don't need to alter ourselves to make ourselves safe or to make ourselves palatable to you. And that's what The Craft means to me.
Amazing, Mitch, that was fantastic. And Stevie?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with absolutely everything Mitch said, really. And well, of course, we're talking a lot about the subtext and the social commentary in there, but on a surface level also, it's just really fun, and it's magical and a little bit scary, and it's funny and it's gritty. But as I said earlier, it's also completely malleable in terms of what you can get from it. The interpretations are endless. I think, yeah, sort of seeing people connecting with others like them is very encouraging, especially when younger, I think. And it's so easy to feel like the odd one out in situations. So it's that epiphany of having a presence and a place in the world against what you feel or what you've been told, and that there is a seat at the table for you. And if there isn't, get your own cutlery out and make one.
I love that. And I think, you know, for me, the craft is, you know, it talks so much about like community and finding like your coven of, you know, I struggled for so many years. I was like, oh, I need to be popular. I need to, you know, oh God, wear like a Playboy bag at school and things like that. And then I was like, no, like, it's actually, it's all right to be a bit weird. And there's some other people too. And, you know, I mean, look at us all here in this chat right now. It's just a group of weirdos, but we are all happy with that. And Kim, what about you?
I think it's always good to have female-centric horror stories that are just sort of their perspective. There doesn't have to be like some killer chasing them or things. I think things like this and like Ginger Snaps, it's good to just focus on like issues that teenage girls go through and how that affects their life in different ways. I think it's I'll always think films like that are going to be really special to me. I think the same, like you said, it's just about finding your people, really. Like you might not get that in high school necessarily, but then you go out in the world and realize that there's more people there than just the like 300 kids that went to school with you in a 5-mile radius, and there's actually loads of people you can be pals with, and it's fine. And I think as well, for like as a witchy person, for a witchy film, it's actually quite a good representation of witchness and Wicca and stuff. Like obviously they do make it a bit more fancy and stuff towards the end, but all the things with like the woman in the shop and the reading the books, it's all very like true to life. It's not too fantastical or anything. I did spend a lot of time in high school trying to like balance a pencil on its tip though, trying to make it balance up in the air. But yeah, I think it's a good representation of growing up and being a teenager, and also all the witchiness. They don't sort of make it, I don't know, they don't sort of like ruin it and make it seem strange. It's a very good representation of what being an actual witch is like. They just make it a bit more floaty.
Well, they have to make it a bit more floaty, don't they, for it to be I remember it, when I was younger, me and my friend wrote a spell book, and I can tell you now, looking back on it, it was very, very bad. But we thought it was great. Nothing worked. We were very upset, but yeah, that's what happens when you barely spell. So thank you guys so much for coming on and talking today about the craft. It has been amazing to dissect this film a little bit more and kind of, you know, have a retrospective look at it. Super quick, and then I'm going to throw it back over to Mitch. But before I do that, Kim, where can people find you? What you're writing for? You know, what you're doing? Go.
Well, I write for Ghouls, obviously, a lot of reviews and things just now. And I write for my own blog, Little Red Horror blog. I'm trying to think if I've published anything anywhere else recently. I recorded a podcast today, a Val Kilmer podcast, on a film called The Chaos Experiment. That'll be out next week. But yeah, just follow me on Twitter. I'm at WickedSister69. I'm always pushing my writing on there, so that's probably the best place.
Thank you, Kim. Alex?
Yeah, everything I write is shared on Twitter as well. Alice Class 71. The writing currently is on Horror Obsessive and Ghouls. All the reviews I wrote previously to those are also on Rotten Tomatoes.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. And finally, Stevie.
Yeah, you can find my podcast Brain Rot on Twitter. It is Stevie's Brain Rot, and you can find it on all podcast places. Oh, this one. What? This old thing?
Thank you so much, Stevie. And back over to you, Mitch. You don't get to do a where can people find you, because I'm pretty sure they know. But thank you for having us.
No, thank you, Zoe, so much. Thank you for. I just want to always do a round of applause for Ghouls. From the very inception that I was party to it, I was like, yes. feminine collective of horror in the UK specifically, but also like representing amazing international voices. Amazing. Thank you so much for hosting that. That was incredible. That was amazing. I hope everybody enjoyed that as much as I did.